With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Tez Zayin. We left off on Daf Tezva of Amid Beis, Mamish, all the way at the bottom line, at the end of the Amid. Just to quickly repeat the flow that we began learning, the Chazal that tell us that Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, that God Almighty tells the Jewish people, when it comes to spending money for Shabbos and Yom Tiv, Luvu Eilai, borrow money. Aliyah, on my responsibility, says God. And v'kachu kedushas hayom, and make Yom Tiv, make Shabbos, any way you want to make it. The more beautiful, the better. And v'ha'aminu bi, and God says, and trust in me. V'ani poreya, I'll see to it that you will be able to repay your debts. I just want to speak out that Yakir pointed out after we finished recording the last year, that there is another Chazal that says, Asei Shabbat chochoil v'al tetztarech lebriyos. That the sages tell us that it's better not to receive money from charity, even though it's going to mean that the foods that we will have on Shabbos will be mamish just like a weekday. Better that than taking money from charity. It doesn't contradict at all what we're learning right now, because there's a big difference between taking money from charity versus what we are speaking about, which is borrowing money. Keminig America, borrow money, put it on the credit card. That's something that we advocate to do when it comes to spending money for Shabbos and on Yom Tiv, and that will lead us into today. We'll begin learning of also a very known saying of our sages that Kol Mizonos Shel Adam Ketzuvim Eloi, that all of the Mizonos. Mizonos doesn't only mean Mizonos; it means all of our income is predetermined. When on Rosh Hashanah, even though for many people it's not sealed, completed, but it's from Rosh Hashanah until and including Yom Kippur. And once that was predetermined, we can work and work. We will not make 1 cent more, chutz, but there are exceptions. And that is here again, moitzois, shabbosis, v'yamim tovim, the money that people spend on Shabbos and on Yom Tiv, the money that people spend educating their children, v'hoitzoas, bon of l'talmud Torah, that the more we spend, God is going to see to it that through the same keli that we already have, we're going to make up, we're going to recoup all of those expenditures. That's going to lead us into, there's a very famous daf, the difference of approach between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai, whenever he would find something beautiful, beautiful food, good tasty food, he would save it for Shabbos. And then if he would find something even better, then he would keep the even better for Shabbos and eat up that which he designated for Shabbos. And Hillel had another midah, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, and we'll speak out what that means, that he had such emunah and bitachon that he lived the moment every time. And he worried about right now for right now, with the full confidence that when Shabbos will come, God will provide what he will need for Shabbos at that time. We're going to come back other agadatas regarding the virtue of hanoisin matana lachavera. If you give a gift to your fellow, you don't have to notify them that you gave them a gift. The counter value will be, in order to promote achdos amongst the Jewish people and avas reim and avas Yisrael, there are times that we do advocate for one to notify the other. That means if you give me a gift, let me know that you gave me the gift, for me to have a greater amount of appreciation for you. When do we say it? When don't we say it? And we're going to come back to the rules of Eruv Tafshilin. Number one, that the minimum amount of food has to be a kazayis. There's a concept by Eruv Tafshilin that Eruv Tafshilin tzrichim da'as, that there has to be a certain amount of knowledge regarding the establishment of Eruv Tafshilin. We will see soon what that means. Who has to have the das? The one that's placing it, or the one for whom it's being placed? And we will learn that everyone agrees that Eruv Tchumin, as we'll speak out again when we'll get there in the Gemara, may not be placed on Yom Tiv for Shabbos. You have to place it prior Yom Tiv for Shabbos, and no one debates that. The Machlokes Tanoim will be concerning Eruv Chatzeros, as we'll repeat what that means. There's a Machlokes Tanoim if one is allowed to place Eruv Chatzeros on Yom Tiv for Shabbos or not, and a lot more. Again, let us start on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis. We left off in the bottom of the Amid. Says the Gemara, this is beautiful, that Tanei Rav Tachlifa Achud Rabbi Noi Chayza. Rav Tachlifa, the one who was the brother of Rabbi Noi Chazor, says, guys, on top of Daf Tez Zayin, here we go. Kol Mizonosav Shel Adam Ketzuvim Loi. All of the person's income right, is fixed, it's determined, it's decided by God. When is it decided how much income we will have? From Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippurim, as we will learn other statements in the sages about Rosh Hashanah and about how for the Beinani nothing is completely finalized until Yom Kippur, but it's during this period of the year. And B'Hashgacha Pratis we are learning this Gemara Tavshin Pei Beis Mamish during Aseret Yimei Tshuva. Now, by the way, there's a Tosfos. We'll learn about this other times. If that's the case, why do we daven every day for a parnasa? The idea is that we learn in Chassidus that even when something is predetermined and it's gifted to us in a ruchniistic place, for it to make its way down, there's a possibility for it, so to say, for it to get stuck as it materializes. That's the purpose of the daily prayer. Here we're speaking about the predetermination of income that's placed beruchnius. However, all of the expenditures, not only for food, anything that we do in our lives which will make our Shabbos, our Yom Tov more beautiful, doesn't matter how much money we spend. All of that will be returned to God, beyond that which was predetermined on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And the expenditures and the money that people spend for teaching their children Torah. One can argue that this indeed goes for all of the tuition that we pay. And I know for sure the schools love this statement because they claim they can charge whatever they want. You have nothing to worry about. You're going to get it back anyway. So they say, and if you're going to cut down, you'll be more conservative. Okay, Beseder, so you have less income. You'll spend less, you'll make less. But if you spend more, then God will add for you. Beautiful. In other words, your profitability will increase and decrease according to how much money you spend. Look inside the top Tosfos, just to appreciating how this is a flow from what we learned on Daf Tes Vav Amid Beis. Says Tosfos Perushri that Harkol Nafka Mikroi de La'el. Why are we quoting this over here? All of this is learned from the pasuk regarding spending money for Shabbos. Koloimed Levu Elai. Going back to what we learned, borrow on me va'ani poideya. That goes to Shabbos, Hoitzah, Shabbos and Yom Tovim. Now, here we added something else. Hoitzah is ban of Talmud Torah. Where does that come from? Also from the pasuk when it says Chedvas Hashem Himo Uschem. So here Tosfos is teaching that Chedva goes to Torah. So Levu Elai also for Chedvas Hashem. For spending money teaching our children. Chavra, let's go back into the Gemara. Amar Abba Ma'ikra. Where do we find in the pasuk that all of our mezonos is prefixed, determined, l'mayla, during the days of Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur? Because it says Tiku, right? A pasuk in Tehillim, Pei Aleph. Tiku b'chaydish shofar b'kesel yom chageinu, blow a shofar. Now, b'chaydish, during the time of the ischatshus of the moon, during the moon's renewal. Then it says Bakese. Now Bakese means at the appointed time. For our festival day, that's the pshat of Bakese. However, the drush of Bakese is during the time. Kese means during the holiday in which the moon is Bakese, during which the moon is hidden. In other words, this is the pasuk that's referring to Rosh Hashanah. Which Yom Tov is the Yom Tov where the moon is covered? All the other Yom Tovim, even Yom Kippur, is already on the 10th. The other Yom Tovim, right, even Shavuos, it's going to be on the 6th, it's going to be on the 7th. It's not going to be on the day of Rosh Chodesh. Pesach, Sukkot, it's in the middle of the month, etc. The only Yom Tov that's on the day that the moon is hidden, which means it's mamish in the beginning of the month, that goes to Rosh Hashanah. So clearly, first of all, you see over here, indeed, the Torah doesn't say on Rosh Hashanah blow the shofar. The Torah says Tiku b'chaydish shofar b'kesa. That's the source that the mitzvah of blowing shofar is on Rosh Hashanah. It says in the next pasuk, Ki choik li Yisrael u'mishpat l'lekei Yaakov. These are the words that we say during Kiddush Rosh Hashanah. Right now, the literal pshat of the pasuk is that there is a choik, right? There is a decree for the Yidden and a judgment to the God of Yaakov. Now, choik also comes from mezonos, that this is the day that chok, not choik, comes under the ches. that the determination of Mezainis for the Yidden happens on the Yom Tiv in which the moon is hidden, which is Rosh Hashanah. And how do we know, says the Gemara, that the word Chak means Mezainis? So either there's a pasuk in Vayigash, this is about how when there was the famine, and how Yosef, representing Paroi, predetermined for the priests how much they could have, that it says va'achlu es chukam, that those kohanim, these are kohanim for avodah zarah, they ate. Again, there the word chukam goes to mezainis. There was a famine. How much food was given to them? Va'achlu es chukam asher naslam paroi. And Marzutra Amar Mahache. Here we have another pasuk from Mishlei where it says Hatrifeni lechem chuki, feed me my portion of mezainas. And these are just two sources. That Kichoik li Yisrael means that the mezainas for Yisrael is predetermined on Rosh Hashanah going into Va'ad B'chlal Yom Kippur. Weiter. Now the Gemara says, continuing about the Hoitzah Shabbos and Yom Tovim, it's not just quantitatively how much money you spend, but it's about living for Shabbos and about setting aside that which is the best for Shabbos. And indeed, Tanya, Amru Olav al Shammai Hazakin, that Kol Yomav Hayoichel Chveit Shabbos. Kol Yomav, that means he always ate for Shabbos. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean he ate? He ate on Shabbos for Shabbos. How do you eat on Wednesday for Shabbos? Explains the Gemara. That matzah behemano, if he would find an animal that he knew, this would be a nice steak, is oimer zul Shabbos. Whenever he found that animal, and furthermore, matzah acheres noimenu, if he found even a greater animal, so then maniach hasashniya v'oichel asad hashoyna. So then the better one he would leave for Shabbos. And that which was previously set aside for Shabbos, he would eat during the week. That's the meaning that Kol Yomov, he would eat L'chvayt Shabbos, because he ended up eating Shabbos food the entire week. Now, Aval Hillel Hazakin Mida Acheres Hoisaloi, and as the commentators say that Hillel Hazakin was not saying that what Shammai was doing, he's going to do something even better. What Hillel was saying, that there is another way. And perhaps Hillel was moided that Shammai's level was even greater. But since Hillel subscribed to the concept of Shekol Maisav L'Shem Shemayim, that all of our actions are done L'Shem Shemayim. Now, there's so many ways of understanding it. Rashi says Shekol Maisav L'Shem Shemayim means that he had bitachon. In other words, when a Yid lives with the consciousness that there's a God in the world and it's not in the heavens, but my oivishter and hashgacha pratis, so then a person would live, whatever you find now, you'll eat right now. That's what God gave me for right now. For Shabbos, it's an inyan to have the best Seder. God for sure will provide for me on Friday the best for Shabbos. And Shenemer, as it says, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. And Baruch Hashem Yom Yom is living in the moment. I have some foresight. The more betachin you have that God is always with you, the less concerned you will be today about the tomorrow. That was the midah of Hillel. Tanya Nami Hachi, that Beishama Yoimrim, the same concept, that Mechad Shabich L'Shabbaseich. I mean, it's from Chad Shabbos, from Sunday, already have in mind Shabbos. And Besil Yoimrim, Baruch Hashem, Yoim Yoim. Okay, says the Gemara, Omar Rab Chama Bar Chanina, Hanoisen Matana Lachaveiroi. If you give a gift to your fellow, Tzarech Lo Yediah, you should, Ein Tzarech Lo Yediah. You don't need to notify your friend, the recipient, that you gave him the gift. Now, why would you notify him? Why would you not notify him? The upside of notifying your fellow is because when I know that you gave me a gift, I'm going to have some gratefulness. There's going to be a promotion of Ahavas Reim. And therefore, it's like a chiddush. She's saying you don't have to notify him. Give him the gift, and you can stay anonymous. Shenemer, as it says, Moshe lo yada ki Koren upon. If this is at the end of Parshas Kisisa, after Moshe Rabbeinu achieved atonement from God Almighty, and he came back down with the second set of luchos, so there was a certain beautiful shine that Moshe Rabbeinu initially was not aware of, and that was a gift that God gave him. The fact that he didn't know it is araya that you don't need to be notified. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Meisvei, Says in a Beitzah. Again, this is again a pasuk from Parshas Kisisa that Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe matana tova yesh li bebeis genazai. This is regarding Shabbos. I have a tremendous gift in my treasure house, and the name of the gift is Shabbos. V'ani mevakesh litna li Yisrael. So lech v'hoidia oisam. Go and inform them about the amazing gift that I'm about to give them. And mikan Amar Rab Shimon Gamliel hanoisen pas letinik. You do have to notify the recipient. So if a person is going to give, let's say, bread to a child, you should notify his mother, because if not, she'll never know that you gave the kid a gift. So do you have to notify? Do you not have to notify? Clarifies the Gemara like Hashem. Rav Chama's statement that you don't need to notify the recipient is when the gift that you are giving is the avida li'igluye, it will become discovered. It will become known. Like, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu, God didn't tell him that now your face is shining, but he found out about it very quickly. So that's okay. But the Beitzah that we just learned is if you will never find out who your benefactor was, who your benefactor is, there's an inyan not to be modest. No, it's not about being modest. It's you want to promote ahavas reim, so it's good for the recipient to know that someone gave him or her a gift. Frek the Gemara, hold on, Shabbos? God needed to pre-tell us about the greatness of Shabbos. Don't we know on our own after we taste and keep Shabbos? Shabbos nami matana levi legiluye. So the Gemara answers that there's different levels to Shabbos. Or let me speak about the words in the Gemara that matan schara levi legiluye, that the reward for Shabbos, the nachla b'limit tzarim of Shabbos, or if we would not know the depths of Shabbos, then you can keep Shabbos. Until today, people can keep Shabbos and they don't fully get it. So they have to know that if we're not getting Shabbos, we got to work on ourselves. But there's something in Shabbos that is the greatest of gifts. And we have to be notified about the kindness of God and the love that He has, that He gave us Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Amar Mar, Mikan Amar Rab Shimon Gamliel, based on the Beitzah, that God told us about, He's giving us the gift of Shabbos, that Hanoisen Pas Latinik, Tzarech Le'diyah Le'imay. You have to notify the mother. Says the Gemara, how do you notify the mother? There was no texting over there. And it definitely doesn't mean that you have to go to the mother's house to tell her, by the way, I gave your kid, I saw him on the street. Of course not. You have to do something that the mother should know that the child got a gift. What do you do? So here the Gemara gives something that don't do nowadays, it won't be appreciated. But then, shayef le mishcha, and umalalei kaychalam, that either you rub oil on the child, or it was very common for everyone, men, women, even children, they would have this blue dye around their eyes. So put some makeup on the kid. So bread you can eat. But when you smear oil on your head, the oil bliped on the head doesn't go away that quick. So the mother's going to ask and by the way, putting oil on one's head was like a big thing. That's the way they used to tip the waiter. They used to put oil on his head. Don't do that today either. So the mother's going to say, wow, who put oil on your head? How beautiful. So the kid is going to say, Chaim Yankel, and he also gave me a piece of bread. That's the way you notify the mother. However, already in the times of Chazal, but nowadays, this is going back 1700 years, 1800 years. Nowadays, then, the Chashen and L'chshafim, that sometimes if one wanted to put a spell, a black magic spell on the other, they would put oil on their head, or they would paint their eyes up with makeup. So the mother would get afraid. You're trying to promote Avas Reim. Here you're going to frighten her. So that's not a good advice. So Amarav Papa, what you should do is, Shayif Lema Oisamin. Make sure that some of the crumbs of the bread, you should put it on the kid's shirt. If you're giving the kid coffee, spill some coffee on the shirt. Do something that even if the child will eat up all the food, there'll be some remnant of that food on the child's clothing. And therefore the mother's going to ask the child, wow, I see you have some crumbs of bread. Who gave you the bread? And the child will then notify who did that, and that will promote, again, Ahavas Reim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shem Ba'irchoi. Yossi Wachtel came in and was an easy Gemara. Don't think this is Loisa, this is the break, this is the Gan Eden piece over here. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shem Ba'irchoi, Kol mitzvah shenas l'hem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. All of the mitzvahs that God Almighty gave us, Nasan l'hem b'fares, He gave it to us in public. Chutz mishabes, listen to this. That Shabbos is a gift that God gave us, Beitzah. God gave us Shabbos in private. God gave us Shabbos in private. And where do we find that? Because it says, Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oisi la'olam. The pshat la'olam is that Shabbos is an eternal sign that we are God's people. However, la'olam is written without a vav. right? The kri and the ksiv, and therefore it could be vowelized with a kamatz under the ayin. La'olam means helem, that Shabbos is a gift, that's secret. No one knows, it's Beitzah. And this is behemshich to what we just learned. So first of all, the Gemara says, an interesting angle to challenge this. If Shabbos was given to us Beitzah, never mind that it's in the Ten Commandments. That's not the angle the Gemara is going. But oy bazoi, in the beginning of Masechtas Avodah Zarah, the Gemara tells us that after Mashiach will come, God Almighty is going to take the nations of the world to task. And He's going to challenge them, why did you not keep the mitzvahs? And one of the things they're going to be l'chayda also challenged on, why didn't they keep Shabbos? But oy bazoi, why will they be punished? Again, that's what Rashi here goes back to the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Rashi says, "V'anon ashkachan shechazar HaKadosh Baruch Hu laha'anishon ala toirav ala mitzvah." D'chsiv v'zorach miseir olamai. I'm reading inside the Rashi. So how can God they should not be punished because it's Beitzah? They never knew about it. So the Gemara says, no, Shabbos oiduye oidino. Everyone knows about Shabbos. But like we learned above, there's the external Shabbos that everyone knows that we have to keep, that we keep. But then there's the matan schara, there's the pnimius of Shabbos, that we can call that the schar mitzvah. The nachla b'li mitzadim, to make that clear, is not something in some next life. It's in this moment. That to really get the concept of Shabbos, we need to do avodah. That's something that's concealed. You have to dig deep for that. And that's something that, so the goyim are going to get punished because they knew about the general Shabbos. What don't they know about? What's la'olam, the inner, the pnimius of Shabbos? Even if matan scharanami oidino, even if everyone knows this inner schar of Shabbos, but the concept of a neshama yeseda, that's something that's la'olam, not la'olam. What's the neshama yeseda? Very interesting. Rashi Chevra says, Rashi roichav leiv, that there's a certain broadening of our heart, which enables us to rest better and to have greater simcha. Rashi. And liyos, and that also expresses itself even begashmius, that we become pasuach l'revacha, we become broader, greater people, meaning that we can eat more and drink more, and it doesn't overwhelm us. Ve'ein nafshay katsa olav, gevaldik. So the neshama yeseda even affects our capacity begashmius of being bigger, of being greater, and that's something that is la'olam. Now, by the way, the Marsha has an opposite approach of Rashi. He says, "Fakir goysha shavas chayiv misa." Goysha shavas chayiv misa. But how can we punish them with misa if they never even know that they can't keep Shabbos? So that's the Gemara in the opposite angle. No, they know about Shabbos, and the chitzonius of Shabbos, which is simply not to do malach, is something that they may not partake in, because the world was created to work. We don't work on Shabbos because God gave us an exemption. If you don't have an exemption, goysha Shabbos as chayiv misa. But here again, that's the chitzonius of Shabbos, which is simply stopping to work. But there's something deeper in Shabbos which is concealed that we have to work more to experience. And the Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, neshama yiseda noisin hakadosh baruch hu ba'adam ba'erev Shabbos. Ulamatzoi Shabbos, noitin loisayemenu. Shenemar, as it says, Shavas vayinafa. Shavas means Hashem stopped creating and He rested. And here we have the drush that when it's Shabbos, not Shavas, Shabbos, vayinafash is a composite. It's a compilation of these words. Vay, oivei, of the nefesh. Oh my God, I'm losing my soul. And by the way, that's the source for us smelling psamim, because the chush of reyach is the closest to the neshama, and to console the neshama that remains on the loss of this higher level of neshama, we give it abyssal shmekach psamim on Matzoi Shabbos. And atkan chevra, the agadata, and now we're going to come back. Now we're coming back to the dinim of Eruv Tavshilim. We learned in the Mishnah that oisa adam tafshil me'erev Yom Tov, that a person should prepare erev Yom Tov, a cooked dish, and that is what we call the eruv tafshilin, because since you cook it erev Yom Tov, now on Friday, when you prepare for Shabbos, we view your prep for Shabbos as a merging with, as mu'urav. It's a hemshich from that which you began before Shabbos. And therefore, we have to remember Rav and Havashi, Kvod Shabbos, Kvod Yom Tov. That's important to remember that. Either way, the Eruv Tafshilin is gonna add to Kavod Shabbos, and it's gonna add to Kavod Yom Tov. Says Abaye. So Amar Abaye that lo yishanu ela tafshil. Avol pas lohi upa. Bread may not be used. I want to give everyone a heads up that we're going to paskin, and we're going to learn this together over the next few daf, that actually an eid of tafshilin should be at least one tafshil and bread or matzah. We use pas. But wait, let's begin the sugya. Abaye says, the Mishnah says tafshil dafke. Something that's cooked and not something that's baked, not bread. Now we want to understand farvos nisht. Because you need something that you eat with bread, not something as staple as pashut as common as. Upas loy melafta. Bread is not a accompaniment. Bread is, the staple. And why would that be? So you want to make sure that what you prepared is something special. So either if it's too commonly eaten, it's not special, right? Or it's not a distinguishable Shabbos food. Similar, so if that's the pshat, we just learned about daisa 2 daf ago. This is an oatmeal cereal in which the grains were pounded, not 4 times, but only 2 times. Daisa is also not something that you should eat with bread, and therefore it's, again, and if the criterion is that which you use for Eid of Tafshilin has to be something that's a accompaniment to bread. But in the times of Chazal, everything was eaten with bread. Bread was like the ikar, so even steak was eaten with bread. The Amar Rab Zayda tells us regarding his observation that people in Bavel, they would eat oatmeal, they would eat daisa with bread, and he would laugh at them. Hani Bavloi Tipshoy, these foolish Babylonians, that the Achli Nahama ben Hama, they eat bread with bread. You don't eat bread with bread because daisa, oatmeal, is bread. It's made out of the 5 grains. Yet, that what Amarvim b'daisa. And if Abaye is correct, if you don't use bread, why are you allowed to use daisa for an Eid of Tafshilin? So the Gemara says, Elam, Abaye is correct, but mida deloy shchiach bo'inon. It's about something that people will know it was especially designated for Shabbos. So it's about more common or less common. Pas is more common, the most common. That's not good for Eid of Tafshilin. But daisa, it's not distinguishable, it's not an accompaniment, still, it's less shchicha than pas, and it suffices for you to use it for an Eid of Tafshilin. Now there's another version of the whole thing. Ikad Amri Abaye says, Lo shanu ela tafshil, avol pas loy. So far so good, so far is the same. And on that the Gemara asked, Ilema, right, what's the reason? If the reason why Abaye does not allow us to use pas is because we don't want to use something that's common, and pas is shchiach, if that's the case, daisa is not shchicha. And here we have another version that for Amar Rav Nechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei Abaye, that ein ma'arvin b'daisa, the opposite of before. So the Gemara says, Ela mila de malapes be'inan, according to this version, it's not enough for something to be less common. You have to have something that is considered a accompaniment to bread, something that's very distant from staple. And therefore, pas loy melafta, and daisa nami loy melafta. If it's not something that is like chashuv enough, distinguishable enough, that you eat it together with bread, and as again, we're going to quote the same statement that don't eat oatmeal with bread, you're eating bread with bread, so it has to be something even more chashuv for Kavod Shabbos and Kavod Yontiv. Right? Says the Gemara right. Tani Rab Chia. Adoshim shebeshulei kedeira. When you cook, the example is always this beans or other types of vegetables in a pot. Some of it gets stuck to the bottom of the pot. They didn't have Teflon. I don't know if they used enough oil or whatever it was. The question is, what happens if you have leftover food It wasn't made lechatchila for the Eid of Tavshilin, but now, Erev Yom Tov, you want to take this leftover food and designate it for the Eid of Tavshilin. So we just learned that it has to be something either that's at least less common. The other version was even more important, it should be something distinguishable. We're not debating that. Yes, but it doesn't mean that the Eid of Tavshilin has to be something that you made for the Eid of Tavshilin. You have to designate it. It doesn't happen by itself. But even if you made food, let's say by us, that we have 2 days Yom Tov, so we make an Eid of Tavshilin Wednesday afternoon. That's the way it is, because Thursday, Friday is Shabbos. You made food Wednesday for Wednesday. Now you have on the Shulei HaKadeira, you have on the bottom of the pot, you have something that adhered. You didn't even take it out because you didn't want to have to scrape it out. Doesn't matter. If you will now remove that from the bottom of the pot and say, this will be my Eid of Tavshilin, that's fine. That's good. Adoshim shebeshulei hakdeira, even, lentils, soymech aliyah mishum, that's Kavan's picture. But there by Kavan it looks too pretty. It means even if it's stuck to the bottom of the pot, that you can rely on it for Eid of Tavshilin al-Chevra. What's important is you have to designate it. Doesn't mean that it's just in the bottom of your pot. But there's a big chiddush here, is that you didn't need to make it lachatchila for the Eid of Tavshilin. Hanamili, however, that we have to adhere to the minimum amount, and we're going to learn a lot about the minimum amount, and the minimum amount of Eid of Tavshilin is a kezayis. Similar, that shamnuni is shalgabe yasak. Yes.
Does this mean that you don't have to separate out? Meaning you could just have a pot of food that you're using for your Yom Tov meal, and just you say the bottom part will be kept as my Erev?
No. You have to separate it, because we learned in the Mishnah that if someone eats up the Eid of Tavshilin before they finish preparing the Shabbos food, then they can't rely on it. This only means is that on one hand it has to be something not so common, perhaps even distinguishable. Mida de malapes. Lentils was something that was eaten with bread. Lentils are fine. But don't think you have to make this for the Eid of Tavshilin. It can be the least important lentils that you had on Wednesday. The ones that stayed in the bottom of the pot. But when you remove it, you have to remove it, separate it, and declare the Eid of Tavshilin, then it's good enough. Same thing here also. If you have fats that are in the knife, shamnunias, chashuv, fats, then the fatter, the better, then it's a whole different culture. Fine, even though it's like the leftovers, as long as you can scrape off your knife the remaining fats from the meat that you had on Wednesday or the meats that you had on Tuesday, you're good, as long as you have the minimum amount. So, and here again, when the isbuhu kizayis. Gewaltig. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav. This is going to be a beautiful halacha. Dogim ketanim meluchim. Small fish, that salting it makes it edible. Now, nowadays, there's a new minhag, garnished raw meat. They convinced us that raw meat is sushi and but then everything needed to be prepared. So he says that if you salted small fish, since it's edible as is, even if a non-Jew now is going to go ahead and cook it, and this is going quickly, we're touching the topic of bishul akum, that something that a goy cooked for us may not be eaten on a rabbinic level, but one of the exceptions to the rule is chevre, is that if it was already edible prior to the goy's cooking, even though he cooked it, you're good. Since fish that were slightly salted are considered edible, even though he made it better, he cooked it. But ein bohem mishum bishuli nachrim. However, now there's a beautiful novelty over here. Guys, we are learning the sugya of Eid of Tavshilin. You have to cook something. The Eid of Tavshilin has to be a cooked item. So if we're saying that as far as the dinim of bishul akum is concerned, the goy's cooking it is insignificant. Salted fish that was not cooked cannot be used for Eid of Tavshilin because it's not a tafshil, it's not something that's cooked. So we say, like in many other areas of halacha, that it doesn't travel on the same track. For bishul akum, it's not considered cooked. It doesn't bother us that it's cooked. But on the other hand, this is great. But now if the guy is going to roast it, and now you have this roasted small fish, yes, you appreciate this? Even though people can argue, it contradicts each other. In other words, the salted fish is not good for Eid of Tavshilin. cooking it is what made it chashuv enough for Erev Tavshilin. So you would argue, well, if you can use it for Erev Tavshilin, then it should by default be asur because of Bishul Akum. No. For Bishul Akum, we say if it was edible prior to the guy's cooking, there's no issue with the fact that the guy cooked it. And yes, it's a cooked item, and you could use this, even though it was cooked by a guy, for Erev Tavshilin. However,
the point is that it was edible before the guy cooked it.
That's correct.
Yeah?
That's correct.
Nechel chai or something.
Nechel k'moshu chai. Correct. And nechel k'moshu chai, no, it's salted fish is not good for Erev Tavshilin. So the cooking it, upgraded it, nevertheless, it's not going to be also because of Vishal Akum. However, speaking about a goy preparing food for you, if he took this fish, even if it was already salted before, but he made the harsana dish, which is that they would take fish fats, and here what's important is, and they would add flour, and they would fry it. Here already it's also not for, we're speaking about bishul akum. Why? Because the flour part was inedible, was unedible, was not edible prior to the guy's cooking. So his cooking here made it consumable. Now we got a problem with bishul akum. Pshita, what's even the chiddush in that? So Mao the MERCAVA daf tezayin Amid Bey says the Gemara that you would think that what? That how do you view this dish? Fish and flour. That if we're going to say that the fish is considered the dominant harsana ikar, when it comes to making brachas, you make one bracha on the ikar. So maybe the fish is the ikar, and the fish that was salted, and we just learned that if a guy cooks slightly salted fish that was already edible, there's no bishul akum. So I don't care if you're making this together with flour. Who cares? View the flour as the lesser significant part, and therefore it should still be permissible. So the kamash malan, that we view the kemach as the ikar, which is why now that the guy cooked it, yes, it's also because of bishul akum. Let's get moving. Okay. As we learned above, and we already quoted this, that Eruve Tavshilin needs to have the minimum amount of a kazayis. And by the way, Arab Abba is not saying that a kazayis is the best. No, the best is what we do nowadays. Take a proper chashava slice of fish. Take a proper chashava slice of meat. We're not looking, but the minimum kazayis is enough. Okay. Elyahu, Erev Tavshilin is being placed for many people. This is such a practical sugya. Kezayis echad lekulam, oidilma kezayis lechol echad ve'echad. The Rishonim explain, we're not speaking about in one household that can I know how to, let's say there's 6 kids, that there has to be a kezayis for every member. No. It means that as we will learn, one Erev Tavshilin could be made for various households. So yeah, one kazayis for one household, but if I know that I'm making an Erev Tavshilin for me and for you and for the other neighbor, so maybe you should eat a kazayis for each one or not. So Tashema, all right, the Amar Rab Abba Amar Rav, that Eruve Tavshilin Srichim Kazayis, Mamish, right? We just quoted the Rab Abba, but it's really in the name of Rab, and when he quoted Rav, he added Bein La'echad, Bein Lameya, clearly, even if it's being made for 100 households, only one kazayis is needed for all. Hold on. You're telling me, Rab Abba, in the name of Rav, that one kazayis is needed. We learned in our Mishnah that Achol Yosha Avad, if the Erev Tavshilin was eaten or lost prior to you finishing preparing the food for Shabbos. So the Mishnah says the same concept that lo yivashel olav atchila. You can't now rely on it to cook food for Shabbos. Just stop a second. The word batchila means, because we learned in the Mishnah that if a person did not make an Erev Tavshilin and no harama is allowed, you're not going to trick the system, but you made food for Yom Tov, really you made it for Yom Tov. If you have leftovers, then you can use it for Shabbos. The pshat of Erev Tavshilin is we're creating a mechanism which will allow us batchila or lechatchila to bake and to cook food for Shabbos on Yom Tov. But shiur mimenu kolshu, the Mishnah says, but if only a little bit of the Erev Tavshilin remained, in other words, some of it was eaten, some of it was left, kolshu normally means a minimum amount, then soymech olav l'Shabbos. And l'choyda argues the Gemara correctly, kashan ab abba, kashan av, my kolshu, lav afal gav, that even if there's no kazayis, it's a kolshu. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a kasha, that in our case, The kolshu means the izbei kazayis, and again it fits with what the Rishonim speak out, because when Av Abba says that an eruv tafshilin needs to have a kazayis, it doesn't mean, he was not saying that the kazayis is amazing. He's saying kazayis is minimum amount. L'chatchila, you're supposed to have a chaticha that's a chavadika slice of fish, of meat. So in the context of, it's really better for you to have a proper slice of meat. If you have a kolshu, means a kazayis, then it's still good enough. Weiter. We're trying to refute this kazayis shir. Tashema, now comes a kasha from a Beitzah. It says in the Beitzah, tafshil zeh tzoli, that when you have to have a tafshil, it doesn't mean dafka something that's cooked. It can mean something that's roasted. It can mean something that's kavush. Kavush means something that's pickled. They used to pickle things in vinegar or whatever. Shaluk, something that's very cooked or something that's ordinarily cooked. All that could be used for the eruv tafshilin food. Now another detail says the Beitzah that kulias ho ispanim. Kulias ho ispanim is some sort of Spanish tender salted fish. It's like a chash of a dish. Tchilasei v'soifai. Here again. So normally it was salted. People maybe ate it as it's salted. But if you cook it, here again, even though it was already edible prior to it being cooked, it's good. And listen to the words. How much has no limit? And if you said an amount and then it was lost or eaten, even though there's less of it left, ein loy shiur, again is mashma, that even if you have just a mashu, just a drop, you're also good. And my love, ein loy shiur klal. Soifoy ein loy shiur means even less than a kazayis. And here again the Gemara says, no, that's not the meaning of the Beitzah. Indeed, ein loy shiur lamaila, that when you set aside the eruv tafshilin, there isn't a max limit. You can set aside as much, you can't say the more the better, but there's no limit. Set aside one piece, set aside two pieces, set aside the whole steak, set aside 10 steaks, that's fine. When it says that the soifoi ein loishir, avayesh loishir lamata, because if it was eaten or lost, yes, we stand our ground that you have to have at least a kazayis. And if there's less than a kazayis, then you may not rely on it, lachatchila, to cook on Yom Tiv for Shabbos. Says the Gemara, another statement here, in the name of Rav, eruv tafshilin sirichin das. Well, you have to have das. Now, what do you have to have das? So we have the words here in the Gemara. There's the maniach, and there's the mishahinichuloi. There's the one that's placing the eruv tafshilin. He for sure has to have das. You have to designate the food, and with your das, and say this is for eruv tafshilin. So the Gemara explains, Pshita das maniach be'inon. We don't need Rav Huna to come and say that the one who's placing it, right, has to have das, knowledge and intent. Das misheini choloi be'inon. Or maybe that's the do you also have to have the intention of the person or the household for whom it's being placed? Oiloi be'inon. Maybe Rav is just telling you that you have to have the das of the maniach. Does the person for whom it was being placed also have to know or not? So Tashema, and here we go. Davua de Shmuel, when he would place the eruv in the city of Narda, Ma'arev Akula Narda, he would actually place it. Guys, we do this today for the whole city. Similarly, Rav Ami and Rav Asi, that lived in Tveria, when they would make in their homes an eruv tafshilin, they would do it akulu Tveria. Similarly, 3, Machris, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, he would make the following announcement when? Not before Yom Tov, that's key. He would make this announcement, dafka on Yom Tov, that mi shalei niach eruv tafshilin, after the fact, Yovev Yismach Alai. And according to many Rishonim, the ikar proof was from Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. In other words, he would announce it on Yom Tiv, prior to Yom Tiv, not like the father of Shmuel that everyone knew he's doing it for the whole city, or like the residents in Tveria, they knew Rav Ami and Avasi has me covered. Here, by this Rabbi Yaakov, it wasn't that known. Nevertheless, l'choira, after the fact, it's going to be good. So that's it. So that's a raya that what all Rav Huna was saying is that you need to have the das of the maniach for whom. For whom? That's very good. In other words, if you want to designate the Eid of Tafshilin for everyone in your city, you have to have in mind everyone in the city. And by the way, that's what we do nowadays. Nowadays, when we make an Eid of Tafshilin, before you make the bracha, you give it to someone who has the power to acquire it for everyone here in the city. And Zachan Adam Shaloi B'fanav, perfectly fine, even though no one knows that someone on their behalf made a kinyan of the Eruv. Then you give it back to the Maniach, who then makes the bracha and declares that it's for everyone in the city. Because you don't need to have the das for the person for whom you're giving it, for whom you're placing it. But the one who's making it can't just make it for himself and it's going to work for other people. He has to have in mind for everyone for whom he's making it. Now, va'at kama. Va'at kama means, so how about having one Yid in Yerushalayim to make it for the whole world? He made it, Rav Ami Navas, he made it for Tiberia. Why not also for Tzfas? Because it doesn't go that way. It's only for people in your city. And how far in your city? So Amma va'at kama, Amram Nechum bar Zachar Mishmed Abaya, ad Techum Shabbos. Techum Shabbos. Now, Rashi says something very strong. What's the magic of Techum Shabbos? Why can't he place it for people that live beyond the Techum Shabbos? Says Rashi, that Ula Oimdim Chutz L'Tchum, because for people that live outside your city, Lo Yechoyod Date Shal Maniach Aleim. The way Rashi makes it sound that theoretically you can place it for people in another city. It's just like we presume that if you live in your city, you're thinking about your locals. It didn't go on your heart to remember people that live out there. Right? Mamash mashma from Rashi, if you know that you had in mind, I know I have a cousin and he lives over there in the next village, and this guy forgets to make an Eid of Tafshilin and I'm having him in mind, maybe it works. It's not that it cannot work, it's just that we presume that you did not have intent and tzrichem das. So only the maniach, but the maniach has to have in mind for everyone for whom he's making the eruv. Let's go weiter. More about one person making an eruv for another. Hahu samyom. You had this blind person that had this genius memory. He was the one that in the yeshiva of Shmuel, he was the one that reviewed all the Torah Shabbat Peh by heart. So he was an asset to have in the base Midrash. And Chazia the Havei Otzif. And this Shmuel saw that this Samya, this Beitzah teacher, was Bisl Morosh Chayradik on Yom Tov. And Amar Lei, Amayatzivat, why are you sad? And he Amar Lei, so to which the Samya responded, Deloi Oisivi Eruve Tafshilin. I forgot to establish for myself an Eruv Tafshilin. And this was on Yom Tov, and therefore, basically, I cannot properly prepare food for Shabbos. Amar Lei. Now, if there would be no solution, what would Shmuel tell him? Don't be depressed, come eat by me. There was no need to say that. Here, Shmuel told him, Smoich Adidi, just like Shmuel's father. In other words, he placed it for not us. Shmuel had in mind for everyone in the city. Oh, but now the Gemara is going to tell us through this story that that's only a bidi evet. That may not be a lachatchila. And what happened was, Lashana, the next year, or the next Yom Tov, again, there was a time that Chazia Hava Otziv, it was the next Yom Tov, that Shmuel saw that this Samya was sad, and Amar Lei again, Amayat Tzivat, and here the same answer, he tells him it was Yom Tov out of Shabbos, that the Lo Yisiv Eruv Tavshilin, I forgot to establish the Eruv Tavshilin, and Amar Lei, Oy Bazoi, Poisheya At, you're Poisheya. That means you purposefully did not place it. Lakula Al Mashari, I had in mind everyone who lives in the city, but that they're not poishim. Lididach, for you, no aser. So in other words, the Gemara is telling us, people that forget once, forgetting something once doesn't mean that for you it was not important. Could be, it was very important, you forgot. If you forget something twice, I don't care how you word it. It means it wasn't important for you. And that's called the Yoro Poisheya and Eruve Tavshilin. You can argue, he didn't place it because he was relying on Shmuel. Me relying on yours is a bidi evet. The Chachamim wanted for every household to place an Eruv Tavshilin. Now again, until nowadays, we mamish in the Nusach, we do it for the whole city. That's for the one person, or for the people that forgot one time. For that it's good. But it may not be used as an instrument for Why do I have to make it when you're going to make it? If everyone is going to think that way, at the end, no one is going to make it. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Beitzah. Yom Tov Shchal Liyas Be'erev Shabbos. Now we're going me'inyan le'inyan from Eruv Tavshilin. Now we're going to quickly chazer a few dinim of Eruv Tchumen and Eruv Chatzeros. Eruv Tchumen means that midrabanan, one may not walk beyond one's Shabbos residence 2,000 amas in either direction. When we speak about a Shabbos residence, so we learn Masechtas Eruvin, it doesn't mean from your home. If your home is in a city, you only start counting or measuring the 2,000 amas when you leave the Ibura Shel however you measure that, right? First you have like the 70 amas, whatever the cheshbonos are, there is a limit how far we can walk on Shabbos. So let's say if I'm taking in Shabbos over here, and I would like to hear a drasha that's happening 3,000 amas to my right to the east. So beautiful place in Eruv Tchumen, and it's considered that I am where my food is. It's as if it is halachically I was koina my shvisa with my food, and I count the 2,000 amas from my food, which will allow me to go to my food and from my food to that city. There's a concept of placing a Eruv Tchumen, which is very helpful in these scenarios. An Eruv Tchumen has to be placed, like we learned in Masechtas Eruvin, prior to Yom Tov, prior to Shabbos. It has to be there during Bein HaShmoshes. That was that whole sugya. Is it Koine Shvisa in the beginning of Bein HaShmoshes, at the end of Bein HaShmoshes? But you got to do it prior to. What happens if I want to have an Eruv Tchumen for Shabbos, because I want to be able to walk 3,000 amas on Shabbos, but I didn't place it Erev Yom Tov for Shabbos, which is what I should have done. Now it's already Yom Tov. Now it's already Friday. Guys, don't forget that on Yom Tov I can carry. There's no problem bringing the food to that location. The question is acquiring. It's like a kinyan. I'm acquiring that location. As far as these rules are concerned, are you allowed to do it on Yom Tov for Shabbos? So says the Gemara. Let's begin with the number one. Yom Tov shechal liyas be'erev Shabbos ein ma'arvin lo Eruv Tchumen. You may not place an Eruv Tchumen. So you're bound with your physical location. And now another din, what's Eruv Chatzeros, is that even though Midai Raisa, you are allowed to carry from one Rishus HaYachid to any other Rishus HaYachid, but Midrabanan, beginning with Shlomo HaMelech, if you have Rishuyos HaYachid that are owned by different people, the classical example will be the way people would live in the times of Chazal, is that we had homes that opened up to a common Chatzer. The Chatzeros were in front of the houses. So the house belongs only to me, even though I also have ownership in the yard, but so does you. So do you. So it's not the same ownership. This is only mine, and this is also mine, but also yours. And the way to, and therefore, you may not carry from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid. What's the solution? Making an Eruv Chatzeros, which will halachically make it viewed that my house also belongs to everyone in the Chatzar. So everyone owns everything. It's like we are partners in everything. And again, an Eruv Chatzeros should be placed before Shabbos. I forgot, but it's Yom Tov, it's not Shabbos yet. Says the Tanach, you also may not place a Eruv Chatzeros on Friday, Yom Tov, which is Erev Shabbos. Yom Tov cannot be used neither for an Eruv Chatzeros nor for an Eruv Tchumen. However, Rebbe Omer, and as we'll see in a moment, there are really two different versions in Rebbe, but this is the first version of Rebbe, that Ma'arvin Eruv Chatzeros, and Eruv Chatzeros, yes, may be placed on Yom Tov for Shabbos, and for Yom Tov you don't need it. You can carry on Yom Tov. But he's moed to the Tanach that an Eruv Tchumen may not be placed. Now, why does Rebbe differentiate between Eruv Chatzeros and Eruv Tchumen? So he has a beautiful logic. You're trying to prohibit. You can't do it on Yom Tov. Now, when it comes to Eruv Tchumen, just like we may not walk beyond 2,000 amas on Shabbos, we may not walk beyond 2,000 amas on Yom Tov. So it makes sense that since on Yom Tov I'm prohibited to go beyond the Tchum, so the Eruv Tchumen is theoretically needed also for Yom Tov because of the prohibition of going beyond. So rectifying something that is problematic for me right now is called an act of rectification. Let's learn it that way. And we may not do an act of tikkun on Yom Tov, which is why you can't do it. Now let's think about Eruvei Chatzeres. Eruvei Chatzeres is not Yom Tov related. I am allowed to carry from my home to the public domain on Yom Tov. That's we had that in Mishnah. Beisil says, so since on Yom Tov, I don't even need an Eruvei Chatzeres. So what I'm doing right now, you're going to tell me you're not allowed to do it because you're being misaken. I am not being misaken anything for right now. Nothing is broken right now. I have no limitations right now. Yes, I'm doing an Eruvei Chatzeres right now, which will preempt me being allowed to continue to carry when I go into Shabbos. But since it's not needed for now, it's gavaldik. So Rebbe says it's not called an act of tikkun. And the only reason why one may not place these eruvim is because you can't do something that's considered a tikkun. It's not called tikkun. That's an interesting way of looking at things. And the Tanakama obviously disagrees. They hold that even though that you don't need it for now, but since you need it for later, what you're doing now is a tikkun for later. Gewaldig. Which is eruvei Chatzeros. Now, Itmar, Rav says, halacha ketanakama. And our version in the Tanakama here is that both Eruv Chatzeros and Eruvei Tchumen are prohibited. And Shmuel says, halacha kerebi. Again, according to our version, Rebbe was the lenient one. Everyone agrees that Eruvei Tchumen may not be placed on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but Eruvei Chatzeros may be placed, right? Hold on. When Shmuel says halachi kerebi, did he mean lakula or lachumra? Now this doesn't make sense. Rebbe was lakula. So asks Gemara, what are you when crying? Pshita de lakula ka'amar. Someone says, no. There was another version of the Tanakam and Rebbe. Mishum d'shalach Rabbi Elazar l'goyla. That loy kisha'atam shenim bebavel. That what? Rebbe was the matir and the chachamim are oisrim, which is the version that we just learned. But you should know Ella, that there's a correct version of the Braisa, that Rebbe was the machmer and the chachamim were the ones that at least permit the Eruvei Chatzeros. So now that we have Shmuel paskening like Rebbe, now we have to clarify according to what version of Rebbe. So Tashema, that after Chlifa bar Avdimi, Avaruv the Kavasi the Shmuel, he became a Rav. He became a ordained rabbi, and the first shaila that came to him was regarding the placement of a Eruvei Chatzeros on Yom Tov Erev Shabbos, placing it for Shabbos. He paskin like Shmuel, and when Rav heard his psak din, he says, "Wow, this person got rabbinic ordination, and the first thing that he paskined was wrong. He did a damage. It was harmful." Now, hold on. If you're going to say the way we learned that Shmuel paskind like our version of Rebbe, which is Lekula, in other words, he paskind like his teacher. He says you can place an Eruvei Chatzeros. But Rav, who disagreed, Rav holds Lechumra, that's the Kilkula. You place something that you were not allowed to place. Someone violated this rabbinic rule of he placed something that he should not have. But if you're going to say that the Rav and Shmuel's Halachic Chachamim, Halachic Rebbe is going to follow the version that they had in Eretz Yisrael, which would mean that Shmuel is the Machmer, and his student now went ahead, right, that Rav Chlifa bar Avdimi did like Shmuel, which means he told the Jew, you may not place it. So, okay, Rav is going to criticize him, but how can he say that he made an act of kilkul? What was he mekalkal? All that he didn't place the Eruvei Chatzeros. And the Gemara gives a very important answer. Don't think that when the rabbi paskins l'chumra, he's not doing an act of kilkul if he should not have been machmer. Because it says the Gemara, that's no proof. Kivin the mekalkel about rabim. In other words, if you told the Yid that you cannot place an Eruv Chatzeros, you know what may happen? They're not going to place the Eruv Chatzeros, and the people there are going to end up carrying anyways. So that's also being overly hainu kilkula chavra daf yud zayin on top of the amid. That's the pshat of being mekalkel. Never be machmir if there's no need to, because then people, because of that, you can't do that, they're going to end up doing something even worse. Says the Gemara that Amar Rava, Amar Rab Chizda, Amar Afuna, that halacha is like Rebbe. However, which version of Rebbe here, Vilasoir? The version that they had Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, that he says that not only may Eruvei Techumen not be placed, but an Eruvei Chatzeres Takem also may not be placed on Yom Tiv, that is Erev Shabbos. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued.